I've been a truck driver for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road. But nothing, absolutely nothing, made me feel what I felt that night. It was a long trip, hauling cargo from one state to another, and I was already tired. The stretch of road was isolated, barely any lighting, just my truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw a man standing on the shoulder, raising his hand for a ride. That wasn't unusual. I've picked up a few people over the years, usually folks who ran out of gas or just needed a ride to the next town. But something about this guy felt off. He was standing too straight, like he wasn't tired or cold, just waiting. But I figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I pulled over a little ahead and waited for him to approach. He was thin, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, with an old cap on his head. He didn't seem threatening, so I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in without saying a word. That already bothered me. Usually, people thank you, ask where you're headed, start some small talk. But he just sat there, staring straight ahead. After a few minutes of silence, I decided to break the ice and asked where he was going. He answered, but his voice was strange, slow, too low. He said the name of a town I knew well, a few hours away. I shrugged and kept driving, but something didn't feel right. The trip continued in silence, and I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't exactly fear, but you know when something inside you screams that something is wrong? I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye, and he just sat there, still as a statue, staring at the road. What gave me chills was that, even with the truck bouncing on the rough road, he didn't move. Not even when we hit a big pothole. It was like he was glued to the seat. That's when I started noticing more. His jacket looked worn, dusty, and his cap was so old that the logo on the front was barely visible. But what really got me was his skin, too pale, almost colorless. Like he was sick or, well, I didn't even want to think about the other possibility. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore it. But when I checked the rearview mirror to see the road behind me, my heart nearly stopped. The passenger seat was empty. Empty. I turned my head so fast I almost lost control of the truck, but he was still there, staring straight ahead. I could have sworn that in the mirror, he wasn't there. Sweat started dripping down my forehead, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I wanted to say something, start a conversation again, but my mouth was dry. So I just kept driving, forcing my eyes on the road, praying to reach the next town as soon as possible. The road felt endless. With every mile, my head got heavier, full of questions I didn't want to answer. That's when I noticed something else that sent a shiver down my spine. The air inside the cabin felt colder, not just a normal nighttime chill, but a dry, eerie cold that seemed to sink into my bones. I glanced at my passenger again, still the same, didn't blink. I've never seen someone sit that long without shifting, without moving their hands, without doing anything. My breathing was heavy, and I knew something was very, very wrong. My gut screamed at me to pull over and make him get out, but at the same time, something stopped me. It was like I couldn't speak, like my throat had locked up. And then it happened. I was forcing myself to ignore everything, just focus on the road, when I saw him move out of the corner of my eye. Slowly, he turned his head towards me. My blood turned to ice. Before I could react, he was looking straight at me. And man, his eyes. They didn't reflect the light from the dashboard. Nothing. It was like they were just deep, empty holes. I don't know how to explain it. I swear to God, I felt my whole body go numb for a second. My heart was pounding, and without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The truck jerked violently, tires screeching on the asphalt, everything inside the cabin shaking. But when I looked at the passenger seat again, he was gone. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I looked beside me, empty seat. I checked the mirror, expecting to see him outside or something. Nothing, just the dark, empty road behind me. My hands were shaking as I let go of the brake and pulled onto the shoulder. I needed to breathe, to figure out what the hell just happened. I opened the door, got out of the truck, and walked around it, shining my phone's flashlight on the ground. No sign of anyone. The guy had just disappeared. No sound of the door opening, nothing. It was impossible for him to have jumped out while the truck was moving without me seeing or hearing it. But he was gone. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself maybe my tired mind had played tricks on me. But I knew that wasn't it. That was real. I got back in the truck and drove off without looking back. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a gas station to get some coffee and pull myself together. The attendant noticed my face and asked if I was okay. Still shaken, I told him what happened, expecting him to look at me like I was crazy. But he didn't. He just got serious. He asked what the guy looked like. When I described him, he nodded slowly and said, "I think you picked up the guy who died on that road a few years ago." I've heard stories like this before. My stomach dropped. I asked him what he meant, and he explained that years ago, a man matching that description had been hitchhiking on that stretch of road when a truck driver, not paying attention, hit him, killed him on the spot. Since then, some people passing through at night have talked about a man asking for a ride and then vanishing. I wanted to laugh, to say it was all nonsense. But how could I? I saw that guy. I let him into my truck. It wasn't my imagination. I was sitting there, telling this story, my hands still sweating. The attendant just gave me a knowing look, like he understood. He didn't ask anything else, just left me there, trying to process everything. I stayed at that gas station for a while before I could keep going. I drove with the radio blasting, trying not to think, trying to forget. But even now, every time I drive through that stretch of road, I grip the wheel a little tighter. I never pick up anyone there anymore. I never saw that man again. But the worst part? Someone else will. Someone else will stop, like I did. Someone else will feel that dry, creeping cold in their truck, see those empty eyes in the dark, and realize, too late, that they gave a ride to someone who shouldn't be here anymore. I've always been a hardworking man, a truck driver, you know? The kind who hits the road for days on end, focused on the load and the next destination. My life was good, no big surprises or mysteries, until that day. I was on a routine trip, crossing a deserted rural road, when I saw something I'll never forget. It was a man, standing by the roadside. He had a sign in his hands, and what was written on it caught my attention. "Help, I lost my entire family." I don't know why, but I hesitated. There he was, alone, lost. But something told me not to stop. Maybe it was the empty road, the feeling that it wasn't a safe place to pull over, I don't know. I kept driving, but soon I was hit by a strange feeling of unease. I even tried to ignore it, but the image of the man with the sign kept haunting me. Minutes later, something made me look in the rearview mirror, and what I saw froze me. The guy was still there, standing with the sign in his hand. But now, the message had changed. It no longer said, "Help." Now it read, "You will be next." My heart raced. Fear took over, and I sped up. The strangest part was that he didn't seem to be in the same spot. It was like he was getting closer to me, but I didn't see anyone moving. I knew that was impossible, but fear made me think there was something else on that road, something I didn't understand. The discomfort didn't leave me. For the rest of the trip, I kept checking the rearview mirror, waiting to see that man again, but he never showed up. I tried to shake it off, even laughed at myself, thinking it was just a silly scare. I got to my destination, unloaded the cargo, and spent the rest of the day trying to go about my normal routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about that sign and the words written on it. Something wasn't right. That image wouldn't leave my head, and the strange feeling that I was being watched only grew stronger. When I got home at the end of the day, I was exhausted, but still uneasy. However, the worst was yet to come. In the middle of the night, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, with a voice I had never heard before. He was desperate, almost out of breath, and said he needed to talk urgently. He told me that, since I left for the trip, my family had disappeared. My wife, my kids, they were just gone. Things were out of place, doors were left open, but no one was there. A deep chill ran through me. Those words didn't make sense. How could this have happened so fast? Right after I passed that road and saw that man. Panic set in immediately, but at the same time, a feeling that maybe I was at the center of something I didn't yet understand started to form in my mind. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. What had happened? How could my family just vanish like that, without a trace? And that message on the sign? I started to wonder if it was all connected. It couldn't be a coincidence. I couldn't even think straight. I just knew I had to do something. My neighbor helped me search, but we found nothing. I spent the whole night looking for any clue that would explain things, but all I found was emptiness. And that feeling of being watched, as if something was surrounding me, never left. The next morning, the worst happened. I was sitting in my living room, trying to make sense of it all, when my phone rang again. It was a message, with no phone number attached, but something told me it was important. I opened the message with trembling hands, and, to my horror, the content was a photo. The image showed my house, the entrance, the window of my bedroom. The strangest part was what was written in the caption. "Now you know." I froze. The photo wasn't from now. It had been taken the night before, while I was out searching for my family. Terror took over me. It was like someone had been playing with me, knowing exactly where I was at all times, where I looked, what I did. That photo made me feel a paranoia I never imagined I'd experience. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The neighbor? He seemed just as scared as I was, but even he started acting strange. One afternoon, he just vanished too. No explanation, as if he'd been swallowed by the ground. No one saw him after that day. I was on the verge of losing my mind, and, to be honest, I started wondering if I was really going crazy. But something inside me told me there was more to this story than I could understand. When my neighbor's disappearance made even more sense, I realized maybe I was the next one on the list. Something was after me, after my family, and everything that had happened in those days seemed part of a bigger plan. But how could I fight something that seemed to have no explanation? That same night, after despair took over, I heard a sound coming from the door of my house. A faint sound, like someone was out there, waiting. I opened the door cautiously, and there, outside, was the sign. The same sign, with the same message. "You will be next." But the strangest thing was what I found just below. The sign was torn, and the word "forgive" was written on the paper, distorted, as if someone had tried to erase it. The worst part is that, after that, everything stopped all at once. No more messages, photos, or any sign that anything was happening. My family was never found, and I was left with the feeling that the road, the man with the sign, it had all been a warning. A warning I didn't know how to interpret until it was too late. I don't know if it was a trick of my mind, or if something beyond our understanding was involved. The truth is, to this day, I don't understand what happened. For a while, I tried searching for answers, but all I found were more questions. The road where I saw that man, who for a moment I thought was lost like me, remains empty. I've never passed that way again, but something tells me that if I did, I might find the same sign, waiting for someone who also doesn't know what's about to happen. I still hear a voice whispering in my head, saying, "You will be next." And even though time has passed, the fear that that thing is still out there, waiting for me, has never gone away. I'm a truck driver, and I've never been the type to believe in those weird stories people tell on the road. I always thought it was just exhaustion or paranoia, but something happened to me a few months ago, and to this day, I can't explain it. I had been driving for hours, deep into the night, when I decided to stop at an abandoned gas station to rest for a bit. The place was old, with a broken sign and rusted fuel pumps, but the parking area was still in decent shape. I just needed an hour of sleep before getting back on the road. I locked the doors, double-checked the passenger side, leaned back in my seat, and passed out. I woke up with a weird shiver, like someone had run an ice cube down the back of my neck. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Just over an hour had passed. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The passenger door was slightly open. My chest tightened. I was absolutely sure I had locked that door. I had checked it. I felt a wave of cold fear, but I tried to convince myself I was just tired, that maybe I hadn't locked it properly after all. Just to be sure, I checked the footage from my dashcam, which records everything while the truck is running or in rest mode. When I pressed play and saw what had happened while I was asleep, my stomach turned. At first, everything looked normal. I was there, passed out in the driver's seat, breathing steadily. Time passed without anything happening, until suddenly, the passenger door unlocked by itself. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a sudden movement. The lock just slid up slowly, like someone had pulled it from the inside. A few seconds later, the door opened with a low, dragging creak. My heartbeat pounded as I watched. And then, something entered. It was a dark figure, moving in a strange way, almost crawling, like its joints weren't right. It crept inside, and as the door quietly swung shut, I realized that at that moment, I was still asleep. I paused the video and looked around, my whole body covered in chills. I was alone in the cab, or at least, I thought I was. I turned on my phone's flashlight and checked behind the seats. Nothing. I looked at the floor, the dashboard, the passenger seat. Nothing seemed out of place, but my chest was tight, and my face tingled with fear. Swallowing hard, I pressed play again. The figure stayed in the corner near the dashboard, just watching me. No face, no eyes, no features. Just a shadow, completely still. And then, after a few minutes, it started to move again. The way it moved made my stomach twist. It wasn't human. It was gliding, its limbs loose, almost boneless. The figure crept closer to me, inch by inch, and for a second, I thought it was going to touch me. But it stopped right beside my seat, still staring. The worst part was the silence. I was there, completely unaware, sleeping deeply while this thing stood inches away from me. The video showed I never reacted, not even a twitch. It was like I was too far gone to sense anything. Then, out of nowhere, the figure began to withdraw, crawling back toward the passenger seat. It stayed there for a few more minutes, and then it disappeared. I say disappeared because that's exactly what happened. It didn't leave through the door. It didn't hide. 1 second it was there, and in the next frame it was gone. Like it had evaporated into thin air. My heart was racing, and I was drenched in cold sweat. I looked again at the passenger seat, expecting to see a mark, a trace, anything that proved this was real. But there was nothing. The strangest part? The door was still slightly open, exactly how I had found it when I woke up. I shut off the video and sat there, trying to process what I had just seen. Was it some kind of glitch in the footage? Some weird interference? I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get the hell out of there, but I was in the middle of nowhere, and driving in that state was risky. Still, the idea of staying in that place, in the same space where that thing had been, terrified me. So I did the only thing that made sense. I started the truck and drove away as fast as I could. My chest felt like it was going to burst from how hard my heart was pounding. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see something in the back, but there was nothing. Or at least, I thought there was nothing. Then something made me glance at the side mirror, the one that reflected the inside of the cab. There was a mark on the passenger seat. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't a shadow. It was an imprint, like something had been sitting there for a long time. But I was alone. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but I knew it wasn't. I drove for 2 straight hours until I found a busy gas station. I pulled in and finally felt like I could breathe again. When I looked at the passenger seat one more time, the mark was gone. I've never stopped at abandoned places to rest since then, and even now, when I rewatch that footage, I feel the same chill crawl up my spine. I've seen some pretty strange things on the road. I've been a truck driver for over 10 years, driving through these deserted highways in the middle of the night, so I've learned not to get easily spooked. But that night, something happened that froze me like never before. It was almost 3 a.m. I was in the middle of nowhere, on a poorly lit road, no gas stations for miles. The only sounds were the engine and the radio softly crackling. That's when I saw it. Right in the middle of the road, a kid standing there, barefoot, in a light-colored outfit. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, the whole truck shaking. The cargo container swung wildly, and I almost lost control. When I came to a full stop, the child should have been right there, in front of me. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. My breathing was heavy, my hands sweaty on the wheel. I slowly opened the door and got out, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I looked ahead, to the sides, even under the truck. Nothing. No sign of the child. My chest was still pounding, my mind trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was just too tired and hallucinating. But then I heard it. A dull, muffled sound coming from the cargo hold. Thump, thump, thump. Like someone was inside, banging desperately. My blood ran cold. I knew the container was locked. I had checked it at the last stop. And even if someone was inside, what the hell could it be? I froze for a second, not knowing what to do. My first instinct was to think someone had snuck onto the truck when I stopped at the last gas station. But that didn't make sense. The container had been empty when I left. The sound kept going, quick, desperate knocks. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like someone inside was begging to get out. I grabbed the key to the lock with trembling hands. Every part of me screamed to turn around, get back in the truck, and just drive away. But what if it was a real child? What if I had run someone over without noticing, and somehow they ended up in the container? I had to open it. I slid the key into the lock and turned it, feeling the cold metal in my sweaty hand. The lock clicked, and I pulled the door up. The beam of my flashlight lit up the empty interior. Nothing but the echo of wind whistling through the gaps in the truck bed. I swallowed hard. This didn't make sense. I scanned the metal floor, looking for anything out of the ordinary, but it was just as it always was. Then I noticed something in the corner, a pile of fabric, bunched up. I moved closer, and when I shined the flashlight on it, a chill ran up my spine. It was children's clothes, torn, dirty, and stained with dried blood. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what to do. It felt like a nightmare, something straight out of a horror movie, but it was right there in front of me. I touched the clothes with the tips of my fingers, trying not to make contact. They were cold and heavy, like they still had the scent of someone there. A child that, I don't know. I couldn't explain it. The blood wasn't fresh. It had that dark color, like it had been there for a long time. But no one had noticed. The container was empty except for those clothes. No sign of anything else. No child. No explanation. I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. A coldness settled over me, and that's when I heard it again. Not knocks this time, but a sort of mumbling. Low, like someone was whispering. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. Just the desert all around me, the road emptier than ever. My chest was tight, and every second inside that container felt unbearable. The sound came again. Help. That's what I heard. A faint voice, almost whispering. And the moment I recognized the word, the container slammed shut with a bang. I had no idea what had just happened, but I felt a presence behind me. I jumped back, the shock almost making me fall. The container door was shut again, as if it had closed on its own, without explanation. I cautiously approached, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, my body ice cold. I didn't know if the fear was making me go crazy or if something was really happening, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I tried opening the door again, but it was locked from the inside. This didn't make sense. I had just opened it with the key moments before. Then, way in the back, right in the corner of the container, I saw something that made me swallow hard. There was a shadow, small, in the dark. It looked like a child, but I knew that was impossible. No one could have gotten in there without me seeing. I just stood there, watching. I didn't want to move any closer. The shadow shifted a little, but there was no sound. Whatever it wasn't moving anymore. The silence was the worst part. Something was wrong, and I had no idea how to escape it. I was completely frozen. I didn't know if I should keep staring at the shadow or run. The tension was unbearable, and every second there felt like an eternity. As much as my body screamed to get away, something was holding me there. I couldn't take my eyes off that shadow. That's when the container door opened on its own again. It wasn't smooth like before, but with a sharp sound, like it was being forced open. I don't know what happened, but I didn't have the courage to look inside. I didn't want to see it. I just got back in the truck, slammed the door shut, locked everything, and didn't think twice. I drove off without looking back. I didn't see anything strange after that. The silence was so absolute, so comforting, that it almost felt unreal. The clothes, the sounds, the shadow, all of it vanished. Like nothing had ever happened. Like the container had just gone back to being a container, like it always was. And to this day, I don't know what happened that night. Whatever it was, it just stopped. But let me tell you, ever since, every time I see a deserted road at night, my body feels that same chill, that same fear, like something's still watching me, something I still don't understand.